It started with tears, not the kind that fall silently, but the kind that make your chest tighten even when they are not your own. The kind that make a stranger stop his motorcycle in the middle of the street. The diner was almost empty that evening, the orange glow of the setting sun bleeding through the glass windows. She sat on the wooden bench outside, still wearing her black apron, her hands covering her face as if hiding from the world. He had no reason to stop. He could have just driven past like everyone else. But something in that moment, something in the way her shoulders shook, pulled him closer. He parked his bike, took off his helmet, and for a second just watched her, a young woman breaking down in plain sight, while the world pretended not to notice. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice hesitant yet heavy with concern. She didn't look up. Only the faint sound of her sobs filled the air between them. "Please," she whispered, "just leave me alone." But he didn't, because he recognized that tone, the voice of someone one step away from giving up. He sat beside her, close enough to feel her trembling, but far enough not to intrude. He didn't ask again. Sometimes silence speaks louder than questions. After a few seconds, she finally breathed out, "I can't take this anymore." Those words, he had said them once too. She wiped her tears with the edge of her sleeve. "My boss yelled at me again today. I broke a plate, and he said if I mess up one more time, I'm done. I can't even pay my rent this week. And my dad," her voice cracked, "my dad's in the hospital. I've been working double shifts, and I still can't manage." He listened quietly. The world judged her mistakes, but he could see her exhaustion, the kind of fatigue that builds up from fighting battles no one knows about. He took a deep breath and said, "You're stronger than you think." She let out a bitter laugh. "If I was strong, I wouldn't be here crying in front of a stranger." He smiled slightly. "Strength isn't about not crying. It's about crying and still showing up the next day." That line made her pause. No one had ever said it to her like that before. Her tears slowed, and for the first time, she looked at him. His leather jacket was soaked with rain, and his helmet rested on his knee. His eyes weren't pitying, they were understanding. The kind of eyes that had seen storms and learned to survive them. He pulled something from his pocket, an old folded piece of paper. "You know," he said, "someone once gave me this when I thought my life was over." He handed it to her. She hesitated, but opened it anyway. Inside, in faded ink, were 6 simple words: "Pain ends. Strong souls don't break." She stared at the note as if those words were written just for her. "Who gave this to you?" she asked softly. He took a long pause before answering. "A waitress," he said. "Years ago." That caught her off guard. He leaned back, watching the distant cars blur into streaks of light. "I was lost. Drinking, fighting, running from everything. One night, I walked into a small roadside diner, just looking for a meal. I couldn't pay. I was dirty, angry, done with the world. But the waitress, she didn't throw me out. She smiled, gave me food, and told me, everyone deserves a second chance, even when the world says you don't." That night, she slipped this note into my jacket. It kept me alive more than once. The girl's eyes shimmered. "So you're passing it on?" He nodded. "Maybe one day you'll do the same for someone else." There was silence again, but this time, it was peaceful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she finally managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He stood, placing his helmet back on. "You don't have to thank me. Just don't give up today. Tomorrow deserves another chance." She watched as he started his bike, the engine roaring softly like a heartbeat fading into the distance. But just before he left, he looked back and said, "And hey, when your dad gets better, tell him someone's praying for him." She froze. "You believe in prayer?" He smiled. "Only when it's for someone else." And then he rode away. She held the note tightly against her chest, tears falling again. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from hope. Hours later, after her shift, she walked into her father's hospital room and sat beside him. "Dad?" she whispered, holding his hand. "Someone told me not to give up today, so I won't." Her father's weak smile answered her with more strength than words ever could. That night, when she got home, she placed the note under her pillow, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without crying. But the story didn't end there, because the next morning, something happened that changed both their lives forever. The next morning began with a strange calm. The air was clear, sunlight streaming through her thin curtains, and for once, she woke up before the alarm. The night before had felt almost unreal. A biker appearing out of nowhere, handing her a note that somehow quieted the storm inside her. She wanted to believe it was just a kind gesture, a random act of compassion, but deep down, it felt like something more. At the diner, the morning rush was already building. The smell of burnt toast, fresh coffee, and the clinking of cups filled the air. She tied her apron, tucked the small folded note into her pocket, and took a deep breath before walking out to face another shift. Her boss was already barking orders behind the counter, as usual. But today, his words didn't sting the same way. A customer called for coffee. She smiled, genuinely this time, and served him with steady hands. Every time she felt that familiar wave of anxiety, she would touch the note in her pocket. Pain ends. Strong souls don't break. Those words had become her armor. But around noon, something unexpected happened. A black motorcycle pulled up outside. For a second, her heart skipped. Maybe it was him. The man from last night. The one who somehow saw her when no one else did. She wiped her hands on her apron and peered through the glass. The rider took off his helmet, but it wasn't him. This man was older, dressed in the same black leather, but with streaks of gray in his beard. He walked in, scanning the diner before sitting in a corner booth. She went over to take his order, her voice polite but distant. "Coffee, please," he said. "Black." She nodded, filled the cup, and placed it in front of him. As she turned to leave, he stopped her. "You must be Claire," he said. She froze. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled gently. "He told me about you." Her heart started to race. "Who?" "The biker you met last night." She sank into the booth opposite him, her knees weak. "Is he okay?" she asked quickly. "Did something happen?" The man sighed and looked out the window. "He's in the hospital." Her breath caught. "What? What happened?" "There was an accident early this morning," he said softly. "A truck didn't see him at the intersection. He's alive, but it's bad. He asked me to find you." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The room blurred, the noise around her fading into a dull hum. Why me?" she whispered. The man pulled something from his jacket, a small metal keychain shaped like a wing. "He said to give you this. Said you'd understand." She held the keychain in her hand, trembling. On the back, scratched faintly into the metal, were the words, "Keep going." Tears welled in her eyes. "Where is he?" The man looked at her, his voice low. "St. Mary's Hospital. Room 12. He doesn't have any family left. You might be the only one he asked for." Without another thought, she untied her apron, threw it on the counter, and ran out the door. Her boss shouted something behind her, but she didn't care. For once, she was running towards something instead of away from it. By the time she reached the hospital, her chest was burning from the sprint. She stumbled into the reception, asking for his name. "Lucas Reed," the nurse said, glancing at the chart. "You're a friend?" She nodded breathlessly. "Please, can I see him?" When she entered the room, she saw him, pale, bandaged, tubes running across his arm. The sound of the heart monitor filled the silence. She walked slowly to his bedside, her throat tight. He opened his eyes weakly when he heard her footsteps. "You came?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of course I did," she said softly, trying to hold back tears. "You gave me hope. Now it's my turn." He smiled faintly, wincing from the pain. "Guess. I wasn't done teaching lessons yet." "Don't talk like that," she said quickly. "You'll be fine. You just need rest." He looked at her for a long moment. "You remind me of her," he murmured. "Who?" "The waitress who saved me." She had the same eyes. The same kind of kindness this world keeps trying to break. Her eyes filled again. "Then let me pay that forward. You're not alone this time." She sat beside him, holding his hand as the afternoon light filled the room. And in that fragile stillness, something wordless passed between them, the kind of understanding that doesn't need to be spoken. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of visits and quiet conversations. She'd bring him soup, books, and stories about the customers at the diner. He'd tell her about the roads he'd traveled, the storms he'd ridden through, the regrets he'd made peace with. And somewhere between those moments, the weight she had been carrying for years began to lift. Until one day, the nurse handed her a small envelope. "He asked us to give you this," she said. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a note, written in his uneven handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm gone for a while. Don't cry. I rode through life alone for too long. But meeting you reminded me that even the smallest kindness can change someone's world. When the rain comes again, don't hide from it. Step into it, and let it remind you that you survived." She pressed the paper to her heart, tears falling silently. But little did she know, his story wasn't over. A week passed. The diner felt emptier than ever. Every corner reminded her of him. The man who appeared from nowhere, left her with hope, and vanished just as suddenly. The seat where he had once sat now stood like a quiet memorial. Each day after her shift, she would walk to the hospital, hoping to find him back in that bed, ready with one of his half-smiles and quiet wisdom. But the bed was empty, the nurse's face apologetic. He checked himself out, they told her. Didn't say where he was going. He had simply disappeared. Still, she couldn't bring herself to believe that was the end. She would ride the bus home, watching the rain slide down the window, the city lights blurring like memories. And every time she saw a motorcycle flash past in the distance, her heart leaped, only to sink again when it wasn't him. Until one evening, about 2 months later, as she was closing the diner, a sound echoed in the parking lot. The low rumble of a motorcycle engine. She froze, the key halfway in the lock. When she turned around, there it was, the same black bike, parked under the streetlight. A figure leaned against it, helmet in hand. "Miss me?" Her breath caught. He was thinner, a few new scars marking his face, but his smile was alive, warm, steady, unmistakably him. She didn't say a word. She just ran straight toward him and hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. He chuckled softly. "Easy there. My ribs still remember that truck." "I thought you were gone," she said, her voice trembling. "I was," he replied quietly. "But I came back because there's something I need to do." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Remember how you said your father's hospital bills were killing you?" Her eyes widened. "You didn't," he handed her the envelope. "It's from a few of my old brothers, bikers I used to ride with. They owed me some favors. We pitched in." Inside were neatly stacked bills, more money than she'd ever seen at once. She shook her head, tears already falling. "I can't take this. I can't." "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "Because this isn't charity. It's gratitude. You reminded me what it means to feel again. To care about something that isn't just the next road or the next mistake. This is me doing what that first waitress did for me, passing it forward." She was crying now, unable to speak. "You barely even know me," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But sometimes the people we barely know end up saving us the most." He stepped closer. "You have a good heart, Claire. Don't let the world make you hard. And when life tries to break you again, remember what I told you." She nodded through her tears. "Pain ends. Strong souls don't break." He smiled, a spark lighting his tired eyes. "That's my girl." The sound of thunder rolled across the sky, soft raindrops beginning to fall. He placed his helmet on, ready to go. "You take care of your dad," he said. "And when someone else is sitting where you once were, crying, ready to give up, you'll know what to do." She swallowed hard. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" He paused, looking at the road ahead. "Some of us are meant to keep moving. But this time, I'm not running from anything. I'm just riding toward peace." He started his bike. The engine roared, echoing against the wet pavement. She stood there, the rain soaking through her hair, watching as he drove away. Not disappearing this time, but fading into the horizon like a story that refuses to end. And when he was gone, she took out the little metal keychain he had once given her, the one that said "keep going," and hung it near the diner's cash register. Customers would often ask about it, and she'd smile, saying only, "It's a reminder." Years later, when a young man once came into her diner, broken, lost, with that same empty look she once wore, she poured him a cup of coffee, slipped a folded note into his jacket, and said softly, "Everyone deserves a second chance, even when the world says you don't." He looked up, startled. "Why would you do that?" She smiled gently. "Because once, someone did it for me." And as he walked out into the rain, the camera would have lingered on the note in his pocket. The same 6 words, written now in her handwriting. "Pain ends. Strong souls don't break."